Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood of Your Legacy Legal Care, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning and welcome to Life Happens with me, Kim Hegwood, and our very special guest today is Sandy Steed with Peace Out Planning. Good morning.
Good morning, Kim.
And so I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today because we're going to talk about planning for peace, how a Life-Change Concierge supports families through the aging transitions. So we should probably start off by having you explain what a Life-Change Concierge is. And so for families that are caring for aging parents and spouse, what does that role look like in real day-to-day kind of terms?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for creating this platform and bringing so much valuable information to caregivers and families. I'm really honored to be with all of you today. And, you know, when people hear concierge, they probably think about that person at the hotel or when you're traveling that helps you make plans and gets you referrals and gets you in the door and helps you get things done. And I chose that word really intentionally because that's at the heart of what I want to help people with. But when it comes to navigating life. And before I founded Peace Out Planning, I spent 33 years in financial services. And my background's really in managing these large projects and programs. And when I had the opportunity, I decided to take those skills and really bring it into life. And so what it looks like day to day now is really scoping, starting with a conversation with people, and to use some project management terms, start with scoping. What's going on? What's changing? Who's on your team? Who are the decision makers? So really applying some of the corporate methodologies that I've learned into life. And first of all, that starts with all the people and what's changing, who's involved. Is there a move involved? Are you, moving out, moving in? Or are you just trying to move on because whether it's a divorce or something like that? And then looking at what support systems might exist. And then what I really like to do is ask a question that most people enjoy, and that is, if they could fast forward a year or two from now, what would help them put their head on their pillow at night and feel peace that you did your very best? Because I think many of us as caregivers, we're kind of want to know that we're doing everything we can, that we're doing the right things, and we're under difficult circumstances. So from there, if that's really the vision of where they're headed, we back into what could be some of the routes that they could take to get to that destination. What are some of the paths forward? So day to day, that could look like downsizing. There might be real estate involved, but there might not be. It could be rearranging a home so they can move their loved one in with them. It could be finding another place, going from a 2-story to a 1-story, in-home healthcare, understanding where and how that could help if you're bringing someone in versus sending someone to be in assisted living. So I really try to meet people where they are because everyone's circumstance is very personalized to them. What are the resources? Who are the team? And one other thing I want to mention is sometimes our caregivers don't even live in the same city as the person that they're caring for. So I focus here in Houston and Austin. So sometimes I can even just be that trusted presence here on the ground. Maybe a parent lives here and they want to make sure that the home is, becomes more ADA friendly. And so being able to connect people with my contractors, things like that. So I just try to meet people where they are. If I can help, great. And if I can't, I usually have a connection or someone who can. At the end of the day, I think it's just understanding where people are, taking what I know from a project management perspective, my resources, and seeing if I can help them with a plan. And if I can't, usually I can connect them to someone who can. So that's the goal.
Well, that's a good goal. So, but that you asked that question, if you could answer the question, what happened, a year from now to make you feel like you did a good job. The whole time I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know how to answer that question. I've been a caregiver. It's been a while because I did it with my grandparents, but I was like, that seems like a hard question. So now I'm going to have to think about that for the future because I got mom to look forward to someday. And so what are the
Yeah.
most common stuck points that you see when families face, transitions? Whether it's an aging parent, divorced, outgrowing a home, how do you help them move forward?
I think one of the first biggest stuck points, and it's kind of what we talked about earlier, is trying to do things right by other people's terms. So what are we supposed to do? What's the right answer? What would other families do? And there's a lot of things we can learn from each other. But one of the things that I think you can appreciate and your listeners is that when we go through major life changes, there's not a perfect roadmap. Family dynamics are different. Financial situations are different. Personalities, geography. So I think a lot of times we get caught up in searching for the right answer that we can kind of get in that analysis paralysis and get frozen and really delay making any decisions at all. So that's one of the most common things I see. And I fell into that trap myself. So I am not judging anybody. And then one of the other stuck points I think is waiting. You just mentioned, you can anticipate that there's going to be a change in the future with all of us, right? And so waiting from a caregiver perspective, waiting for the next treatment, waiting for the next improvement, waiting till there's more certainty, or sometimes it's waiting till all of a sudden you can't ignore the situation anymore. So I think thinking that you have to have a perfect rule book or roadmap and then waiting while you're trying to find that perfection, I think that kind of slows everyone down and keeps us from making decisions. And I know that decisions sometimes can be really painful. So, all of that's just to say that I think we're looking for things to be stable. And when you're in these life changes, you have to find that way to be nimble, because you can make one decision, then tomorrow you have to make a different one. So everyone's situation is different, but these are two areas that I think people can tend to get stuck in because we're human. And, yeah.
So how does understanding the emotional stages of change help people move through transitions?
Yeah, so many people might have heard of the grief stages, and in the corporate world, we often refer to it as the change curve. So we actually use the change curve to prepare departments and employees for major transitions. And on my website, I actually put a visualization of, I believe life is a highway. And so I put this visualization of the Kubler-Ross change curve as a road. And so you can move through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and eventually commitment is what we want to get to. Commitment to whatever that is, whatever your next step might be. And the truth is that we don't just move through these in a linear straight line. We could go up and down and all around, back through these curves. So when I was going through my own major life changes, and actually when I was writing my book, it's really dawned on me that I didn't realize where I was. Even though I worked with the curve in the corporate environment, it didn't dawn on me that I had spent a lot of time in denial and anger, if I'm honest, bargaining. And what helped me with the change curve and why I brought it into my work is that it gives a language for us as caregivers to help people, number one, realize where we are. But number two, once we've got the language of what we're experiencing, it helps us stop thinking like something's wrong with us or we're doing something wrong, but really we can start to lean into the stage that we're in. And that alone can bring a little sense of relief. Like, okay, I realized I was in denial, and actually it takes a while to realize you're in denial because you're in denial. But, and then going on to helping yourself find a little momentum to keep moving through that curve. The other piece I think it's so helpful is with family dynamics. I won't go into all my personal situation, but you might have a sibling that's in denial or a mother-in-law that's in denial, and then someone's angry and someone can just be shut down in depression. And so by having these descriptors, if you would, from the change curve, it helps us think about, okay, well, this is where that person might be, or let's identify where we are so that we can understand where we're coming from and maybe reduce that conflict or just a little bit, if we can just find a little more grace for each other, because, things can get pretty hot in the kitchen when things are going on. So.
Oh, definitely. So you've supported clients through moves, estate transitions, and complex family dynamics. What's one story that illustrates having about how having like maybe a structured plan can reduce that conflict and emotional overload?
Yeah, well, the story that shaped me the most, even though I've had several, like many of those listening, change doesn't kind of come in ones. I think it is threes, maybe, or fours. But I want to share just the story of my own family. That's what really started everything when my mom was battling cancer. She was diagnosed here in Houston, and then, they lived in California, so she preferred to go in her own home and get treatment in California. And I'll be very honest, we didn't have a plan. My dad really stepped into that role of caregiver. My brother lived locally. And so, and maybe some of your listeners can relate, when you're not one of the caregivers on the ground, you can feel left out. I was making trips back and forth often. And then I would come in, I'm going to fix things when I get there and push for the trials and just all these things that I was in fighter mode, and they were different places in that change curve that I just talked about. So that experience, I think, changed me and actually prepared me for some other life changes with my spouse, who's now my ex, unfortunately, but we dealt with addiction in our family as well. And so I didn't even know that I was getting prepared to navigate change in a much different way. But going through these things, you kind of realize, I wish I'd done this, I wish I'd done that. And so that's where I learned. After my mom passed, we did, at the end, we had a plan, but it took us all that learning, going through the chaos before we were like, okay, we need a plan. And my dad's like a logistics engineer, so he's an excellent planner. My background's in program and project management, and here we all are, a bunch of talented planners, and we did not have a plan. And so that's what really dawned on me, is like, okay, what can we do differently? So, we moved my dad here closer to me. He's now a proud Houstonian. And then we're having a lot more open dialogue. The other thing I would say is, through my experience working in financial services, is understanding some of the things that we have to put in place when things are calm. And so there's some of that planning comes into place. Helping people think through the housing transitions is one thing, and the logistics, but really that deeper question, like we started with, is what matters most? What can help create more peace in the situation? That's where everything I went through with my mom and also my exes just helped me, come up with my business and what I think I can offer value to people. That's where my book was born. I'll be honest, I spent a lot of time in anger going through everything with my mom. And I wrote that book starting out in anger, like how to not go out like your mom and, things like that. And I really moved in. It took me a while. I'm now in acceptance and commitment. And really now it's thinking about, how do you live through change? How do you live through it more on your terms? And that's what I think I can help caregivers with today, is only from the lessons that I had to learn, and all of us are learning every day. And then how do you kind of bring that into something that can add value to other people, whether it's just a consultation, a quick phone call, or like I said, I've got my book and some other content out there. I try to meet people wherever they are and just help in whatever way I can.
And that's important, because I think when people start going through the process, most people are unprepared. We try in my practice to prepare them early, talk about it early, but one of the things, and you kind of mentioned it, is families don't always talk about the hard things ahead of time, so that you know what the path moving forward would be. If this occurs, kids, here's what I want you to do, kind of stuff. So doing these scenarios and things like that, as people, as your parents and grandparents, things like that, as they get older, spouses, you get this diagnosis. Okay, well, if worst case scenarios, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to, how do you want things to go? Because that's crucial. The one thing that my grandparents were very vocal about is they wanted to be at home. That was it. They wanted to be at home, and my job was to keep them at home, and that was a job. But we did it. We kept them home the whole time. So, but caregiver spouses often feel isolated and exhausted. I see a lot of them. How can your peace out planning approach help them regain clarity, boundaries, and a sense of control during a major life shift?
Yeah, I think definitely one of the hardest things is we tend to try to be everything for our loved one. while we're trying to maintain our career and the other roles as a parent and a friend and running the household, and then let alone your physical and emotional health as a caregiver. So at the end of the day, it's not sustainable long term. So what I often see happen is that the caregiver kind of disappears in this caregiving role, and the entire world, I saw it with my dad, I fell into it with myself as well, as we just become focused on managing the next appointment, the next problem, the next treatment, the next, chaotic moment. And you're constantly, I think, on eggshells. So depending on whether the spouse or loved one is going through what type of change or treatment are they going through, you can also experience a lot of shame and isolation in the space of an addictive loved one or mental health struggles, maybe a lifestyle illness. People don't really know or want to even talk about what's going on. And so that's where you can really start feeling conflicted. You can fall in that anger, but you can also start isolating as a caregiver. So I think being a spouse of someone who's going through maybe what's considered a normal illness is one thing. And then you've got these other treatments or situations that spouses go through and nobody talks about it. And there's a lot of shame. And so because of that, I think some caregivers can just stop reaching out altogether. So what I hope people can take away from our talk today is that this is your journey too as a caregiver. Yes, your loved one needs you, but your life, your health, your well-being matters too. And so that's where some of those boundaries might come in. Actually, probably first understanding like what is your boundary physically? Can you still lift this person up? What is your boundary emotionally? Can you still communicate with the person that you're trying to care for? And then if you can't and you've run up against those boundaries, who can help? And that's where I think assembling a team, working with people like you and your team, Kim, and it could be a therapist, it could be, there's so many resources out there, but the one thing that it starts with is the caregiver being able to accept help. It could be from your church or friends and family. And a lot of times we're like, no, because we don't want anyone to look under the hood of our life, especially if you've got some shame associated with the change. So I think it's really important for a spouse to be vulnerable, accept the help. Maybe people can't come over and help you solve your hands-on situation, but if they want to send you, Uber Eats and things like that, just start small, bring them to help wherever you can feel open to it. And that might open the door for you to know that you're not alone. And then get your teams assembled. And then honestly, I would say after you go through whatever it is that you're gone through, because every cloud runs out of rain. And that I said that a lot, and hopefully, at some point, every cloud runs out of rain. And so that's the time where hopefully you've learned a lot and you can start thinking about your own journey for you. Hopefully you can do it simultaneously, but honestly, it's really hard. So, you might have to get through one season in order to then focus on your own. But as a spouse, it's trying to understand where you stop and other people can begin at whatever way that can look like for you. Again, everyone's situation is very unique, but that might've been a specific answer, but it's something I don't think people talk about. So I wanted to bring it to the forefront today when you've got some shame involved in your situation.
I think for me, it was guilt.
It could be that too.
Was I doing enough? Were the kids suffering? Because at the time I was caregiving, in charge of caregiving, it was my grandparents and I had 4 teenagers in the house. And I was still litigating back then. So not only was I in the courtroom, I was running back and forth, from here to their house. I had 4 teenagers in the house. They were all doing stuff, so, I always felt like I wasn't giving, definitely those kinds of things. So, but for listeners who are just beginning to realize a big change is coming, maybe a parent's decline, a move, a shift in responsibilities, what's the very first step you recommend they take to avoid that crisis mode decision making?
Yeah. First, I just don't want anyone listening to think that they're too late, but I also don't want them to wait to plan ahead. So, the truth is none of us are getting out of here alive. And so oddly enough, coming to terms with that fact alone can help create a little bit of peace in the moment so that we can start focusing on what really matters. So if you're just beginning to see a shift and, something's changed, and I always like to say, you kind of start seeing it either in the time, talent, and treasure. Something's weird with money. Something's weird with how they're spending time. Maybe they have gifts, but they're not using those gifts anymore. You kind of start to notice those little signs. And honestly, if you're in denial, you might not see them, but maybe just hearing those words today might help people notice some signs sooner versus later. Then start the conversation early on. Let's not think that, oh, this will just go away, because many of us think, oh, it's just going to get better. It'll go away, or they just need this or that. A lot of times it's just the beginning. There's a nonprofit called the Conversation Project out there. I don't know if y'all have heard of it, but I always say that that's a great place to start. It's just helps people get clear on wishes and preferences. And then the other thing, and it's not usually the first thing that comes up, is finances ahead of time. In my last role as Life Event Services Director at the bank, even a misspelling on one account and your trust and your documents, it could cost you months. And so if you can take care of some of those practical financial pieces ahead of time, things like having a power of attorney, getting that early. I mean, that was a game changer. Without it, in my situation, I can't even imagine how life would have been without, having some of these things and just finding that perfect moment. It might seem too early in a situation, but I think it's not early to get some of these practical pieces set in place. The other thing I'd encourage people to do is just, again, when you're thinking about the other person and you're setting up a beneficiary for your loved one or a POA, why not do it for yourself? We kind of just talked about that a minute ago. Think about what support you need early on, but at the end of the day, just try not to wait. There's a lot of gifts actually in the darkness of caregiving, and I don't want to say it's all darkness, because I think it wakes us up. It helps us understand what we're really made of. That's one of the things that took, like, wow, I did things I did not even think I could do with my mom and, with my personal situation. So, I think just don't wait, and you're not too late. Just start where you are.
Most definitely. So I think with my grandfather, because he passed last, gave me a chance to really get close to him, learn things about him I didn't know my whole life, so it was really good. We talked about anything and everything, so it was good and wild. So Sandy, if people want to find you and definitely get your book, how do they do that?
Well, if anyone just wants to email, peaceoutplanning@gmail.com. I've got my website, peaceoutplanning.com, if you want to look at my little change curve and my interpretation on that. And then just give me a call, 832-786-0836. Like I said, if it involves just wanting someone to kind of help you think about a plan, I'm happy to do that. And if you're not ready to talk with anyone, then I've got a little podcast, very short, 5 minutes every Sunday I put out there, Peace Out Planning as well. And it's just little tips. It's all in a road analogy because I want to make things easy and light for people. So hopefully one of those nuggets will be helpful.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sandy, for being on the show. And we look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a blessed day. Thank you.
You too.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.